Hello, Amos. I'm excited to talk with you today, regarding Healing the Divide, the 10th anniversary edition of Recovering Christianity's Mystic Roots. So it's great to talk with you. So just tell my listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do. And thanks for joining me today.
Yeah. Well, by trade, I'm a therapist. Um, but what I've been doing for many, many years is trying to help people, I think, relax in the deepest sense of the word. A lot of people think of relaxation, but what they think of as relaxation really is quasi relaxation. Most people don't know how to deeply relax. And I think one of the beauties of centering prayer, silent prayer in the Quaker tradition, I'm a Quaker, um, is that when you quiet the mind, it over time, it gives permission to the body to release tensions that it has, deep in its muscles, and to relax on a deeper level than people thought was possible. And I really believe that relaxation is key to our world today because we have so many tensions and anxieties on a personal level and on a global level. And in order to be able to handle all that, I think people need to have deep interior resources, which come from being able to experience relaxation in the most profound sense. Of course, in the Christian tradition, they would call it resting in God, but there's also just a therapeutic aspect of it too that people. Like John Kabat-Zinn and others have brought to hospitals and people who are in rehabilitation and people with mental problems and relaxation. I think on numerous levels is therapeutic. So that's kind of my passion, really. And as a Christian, the theology, the non-dual theology that goes along with that is important to me. But yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
No, and it makes sense. And I think we're all, including myself, sometimes we're walking around in a normal that doesn't have to be our normal. And when we do, and we'll get more into it when we talk about some of these practices, such as centering prayer and other practices, we begin to realize our normal, our old normal didn't have to be that way. And we didn't need to live that way. And we could have a new normal. Um,
Yeah.
so why did you write Healing the Divide? Obviously it came out in I think late 2013, and I read it and I really enjoyed it. So why did you write that book? And then what did you add to the 10th anniversary edition really to make it more valuable for readers?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people have been searching for deep forms of spirituality. Oftentimes, that's related to mystical spirituality and Christian mysticism. But a lot of people, I think, don't realize that there is a deep mystical tradition within Christianity, and that we have our very own non-dual theology. That word non-dual is apparent in a number of the world's religions, but Christianity has had that tradition all along. And so for me to be able to bring that to light and to show people that you don't have to go to the East, to find whatever it is you're looking for, that the deep forms of spirituality and Christian mysticism are available in the Christian tradition, and that includes not just the prayer forms such as centering prayer, which Thomas Keating, I know is a teacher of yours, Rich, and is also a teacher of mine. Um, but not only do we have the experiential basis and the practice of silent prayer that brings us to those places, beyond words, beyond thoughts, which bring us to a peace that we didn't think was possible, which is really gets us out of the dualistic, kind of gridlock and tension that most people experience all the time. The reason why healing the divide is important to me is just to be able to put words to that non-dual theology that's at the core of our tradition, which basically is that Jesus is at once divine and human, creator and creature, eternal and temporal. Um, in all of that, all those contradictions are resolved in him. And so the beauty of that is that we all are, as human beings, have lots of contradictions in our lives. But the beauty of this theology of the Jesus paradox, is that we can resolve those contradictions and those paradoxes within ourselves, because we see him as he is, which is completely whole, holistic, non-dual, um, you know, one dynamic unity, and in that is the divinity and the humanity, and that we also have divinity, I would say, with a lowercase d, um, and we also have humanity, and we can find a rest and a relaxation in that creative tension, and we can resolve those contradictions that we feel deeply within our psyches. And it's I think what Paul said in Philippians, a peace that passes understanding, that is possible. And so I try to put words to that. And my best words for that is the Jesus paradox. And the 10th anniversary edition, I have written here the things that I've done to update it. And the first thing is that the citations now are of an academic quality.
Okay.
So my first book, the citations just weren't really up to par. And the second thing is that, in my estimation, in the first book, I didn't reference the two Alexandrian mystics who are really pivotal as much as I should have. So I mention Cyril of Alexandria and Severus of Antioch more in the 10th anniversary edition. And then third, some of the original work was redundant and lacked, I think, some scaffolding to help the reader follow along. So I have included, or I should say, cut out sections of text that were not necessary and streamlined it. Finally, I incorporated the understanding that the Jesus paradox is the West's non-dual theology. And I touched on this in the original book, but I've expanded on it now in this 10th anniversary edition. And I do want to thank Within Stock Publishers for taking on the 10th anniversary edition, and it's with the Stock imprint. My first book was resource publications through Stock. This one is the imprint edition. So anyway, I'm very happy with it. And my wife actually said, I didn't like the first book, but I really like this one. So maybe that's some encouragement. I don't know.
No, I mean, I look forward to reading it. I've obviously read the first book back in 2013, and it had a huge influence on me. And that was my introduction to centering prayer, and off I went. So, so I look forward to reading the second book, and with all the great changes you made to it. And then obviously you and I have talked about the cover. I think the cover is beautiful. I love the cover and what they did with it. So that's great. And regarding dualistic minds, because when I was reading on Amazon, the description, the first sentence, says healing the divide is a bold call to understand Jesus according to the earliest lineage of Christian mystics, which we touched on, a call to transform our dualistic minds and heal a divided church. So maybe just talk a little bit about the dualistic mind for people so they can understand, well, what do you mean by that, and why does our dualistic mind need to be transformed?
So in the ancient mind, the idea that the creator and the creature could be united was just crazy. People thought it just, what are you talking about? That just doesn't make any sense. And so somebody came to Athanasius at one point and said, "How is God equal to the Son, right? In other words, how is the infinite God who created this world equal to, you know, Jesus Christ? And what Athanasius said, and I thought they've always kind of meditated on this and thought it's a just a powerful way of looking at it. He said the same way that sight is equal to the eye. So the eye is the physical manifestation, the limited vehicle through which we see. But sight itself is expansive and spacious, and it almost has kind of a limitless quality when you're standing at the top of a mountain. And so the two are really one. I mean, you can't have sight without the eye. And the reason, the purpose of the eye is to give sight. So that's a way of kind of breaking down the dualism, of the sight is one thing and the eye is another thing. They're actually part of one dynamic. And they can't be separated. And the same thing I think can be said. People will often argue that there are buyers and there are sellers, period. They're two separate entities. But when you really look at it carefully, they're part of one transaction, which is called the sale.
Right.
Without the buyer, you wouldn't have the seller. Without the seller, you wouldn't have the buyer. So there's one transaction, and that transaction is the sale. And you start to see lots of different kind of aspects of this. So another favorite story of mine is there's two daughters and they're fighting over an orange. And they start to slap each other, and finally mom gets involved and says, hey, why are you so conflicted over this orange? And mom is wise, and mom asks some clarifying questions and said, uh, Stephanie, what do you want from the orange? And she says, well, I want the meat of the orange to eat. And then, Felicity, what do you want from the orange? This is the other daughter. And she says, well, actually, I want the orange rind so I can make some tea, because I want to make some orange peel tea. And mom says, hey, problem solved. Let's peel the orange. Here, Felicity, you have the orange peel. And Stephanie, you have the meat of the orange, and problem solved. And see, and that's how it often is with our dualistic minds. We're just so sure that we're in this kind of fight, and we just want to do this. But when we really get into it and look into the details, we see that there is a way out of the dualistic gridlock that we so often find ourselves in. And our world is so polarized today. And that's why this stuff is so important. Because if you can see through the two different sides of the tug of war, and you can just kind of concentrate for a moment on the tension in the middle of the rope, and just kind of stay in that tension long enough, and you will find creative ideas that come to mind that wouldn't have come to mind otherwise if you were just fixated on one side of the polarity or the other. So that's the beauty of non-dual thinking, and that's why I think it's important today. And that we have a divided church, and the reason, big part of the reason we're so divided is because we just take sides and we start pulling on one end of the rope or the other instead of taking a few steps back. And I think my favorite example of this, I'll end with this on this question, but my favorite example of this in the life of Jesus is when, there's this angry mob and they're about to stone this woman. And in the midst of all of that mayhem, he has the wherewithal, he has the presence of mind to take a step back, and he starts doodling in the sand. No, I don't know about you, but if I was in the middle of some kind of mob scene, I would just get pulled into the vortex of that, and feeling the anxiety of that mob and everything else. But Jesus has the wherewithal, the centeredness to just kind of compose himself and start doodling in the sand. And then at that moment comes this amazing realization of how he should respond, what he should say. And he says some of the most profound words in the entire Bible. He says, he who is out without sin cast the first stone.
Right.
And as a result of that, all of these men who are in this mob scene are convicted because, some of them have visited prostitutes in their youth and so on. And they realize that, that they also have guilt. And so one by one, they drop their stones and they walk away. But there is a way out of no way. That people like to put us into this like all-encompassing conflict, and get us pulled into it, like you have to take a side right now. It's like, no, I don't. I really don't. I'm going to take a few steps back. I'm going to doodle in the sand. And so that's, to me, that's what paradoxical thinking or non-dual thinking is the practical aspect of it is.
No, that's helpful. Thanks for kind of going into that detail. You touched on it, so and it's neat that you call it the Jesus paradox, which you touched on earlier, and I guess I haven't read of anyone calling it that. So just go a little slightly deeper in what is the Jesus paradox, and really why is it so powerful, significant, and why is it why should we value it, and how powerful it is.
Well, it gives us a new way, I think, or a different way of reading the Bible. Because when we read the Bible, what we start to realize is sometimes Jesus is like doing stuff like I would do when I have a bad day. For example, Jesus is having a bad day and he curses the fig tree. It's something to me that's very human. I mean, that's what I would do if I'm having a bad day. I curse a fig tree, right? But then there's these other moments in the gospel when there's so much power that's radiating from him, and there's so much power that's in his clothing and the energy around his body, that somebody comes up and touches the hem of their garment and they come away healed, totally healed. This woman was having hemorrhages, and she touches the hem of Jesus's garment and she comes away healed. And he says, hey, who touched me? And his disciples look at him like, what, are you crazy? Like, there's this crowd all around you. They're all touching you. He said, no, somebody, he realized there was some healing power that left his body. And so finally, this woman came forward and said, I touched you, and I've been hemorrhaging for years, and now I'm healed. And but I think that's the creative tension of the Gospels, is that you have these aspects of Jesus which are really human with a lowercase h, I would say. And then you have these aspects that are divine with a capital D. And they're constantly in this kind of creative tension throughout the Gospels. But he embodies both. And that's the beauty, is that he is one united dynamic nature. So he encompasses all that it means to be human. He also encompasses all that it means to be divine, and that is a mystery we'll never explain away. We can try, but I think the Orthodox Church probably says it best, that ultimately it is a mystery. The two great mysteries of the Christian tradition, according to the Orthodox, is the Trinity and the Incarnation. And the mystery of the Trinity is that God is one and three at the same time. My favorite metaphor for that is H2O. H2O can be ice, it can be water, and it can be steam, but it's all H2O, right? So it's different ways or skillful means that H2O has, to manifest in the world, it's a very, very powerful elemental force that, creates huge canyons like the Grand Canyon and so on. And it's because it has this diversity. And that's the beauty of the Trinity. It is one essence, but it has three different forms. And then the same thing is said about the Incarnation, that just as the Trinity is one and three at the same time, in the Incarnation, Jesus is God and human at the same time, at once God and human. And that's that's a level of unity, a depth of unity that I think, when we really think deeply about these things, that we're yearning for. That there is this unity that transcends and includes these extreme polarities. That there is this unity, this unitive power in this world that can transcend and include both humanity and divinity. So I mean, that's ultimately what we're trying to do in deep forms of prayer, like centering prayer, is to find that profound peace that's at the source, that is beyond all the dualistic mind's machinations, and that, peace, we need to find some words for it. We can't just opt out and say, oh, it's ineffable, we can't say anything about it. We can say something about it, and that's what I try to do.
Great. No, and I think many people think of Jesus as a teacher or a human or a great prophet, or they think of Jesus as God, and not necessarily think of at once both. And then that really is
Right.
a game changer, and it's a game changer for me. And it's nice to know that I can relate. I think of myself as sitting with Jesus during my centering prayer sit, and then getting up and walking with Jesus. So it's a huge change in that he was human like me and experienced all the emotions that I experience, but at the same point he's God. And I'm not, as you mentioned earlier, I have little d, little divinity within me. I'm certainly not big D, but it makes it easier to relate to Jesus, and then maybe better understand him, and the actions we might read about in the Gospels as well.
Right, but it's important to realize that Jesus is not a difference in category. It's more a difference in kind. For example, maybe the little d in me is like a candle, and maybe the big D in him is like a stadium floodlight. Right? It's still light. Right?
Right, right.
It's still emanating the same thing, which is light. It's just that we have different capacities depending on who we are, and so on. But yeah, and I think the Christian right is mostly comfortable with Jesus's divinity, not his humanity, and they basically see him as God. Period. So many that I've encountered in Christian right. The Christian left is the other extreme, where they see him as a human wisdom teacher, somebody who lived in Nazareth and then lived around the Sea of Galilee and who taught during this time. But he was basically a wisdom teacher, and they're very uncomfortable usually with the divinity or with a capital D or with the God aspect. But I really think both are reductionist, both are truncated, both are extreme positions, because ultimately what the mystics of our tradition tell us, which I think is the true tradition, is that Jesus is at once God and human at the same time. And it's easier on our mind if we just take one side or the other, say, hey, he was a human period, he was a human being, he was a wisdom teacher, that's it, right? Or we take the other extreme, he was God, period, there is no other way, right? Both are extremes. What we have to wrestle with, even though it's more challenging on our mind, is that there's this dynamic unity here of both going on at the same time.
No. And I know we can spend a whole episode on this topic, so maybe just briefly touch on it. I think we should touch quickly on centering prayer because you mentioned it in the book, and I know you've been practicing centering prayer probably for 30 or 35 years or so. So, for the listeners that aren't familiar with it, what is centering? What is centering prayer, and what would you like to share about this practice you've been at for a long time?
Well, Evagrius was one of the desert fathers and mothers. He was obviously a desert father, but he's one of the most well-known of the desert fathers in that tradition. And one of his famous quips, because he always spoke in these very short phrases that had a lot of potency, is he said, prayer, and we might say centering prayer, is the shedding of thoughts. And another way that we can think about that is that in between each thought that we have, there's a space. And what we're trying to do during centering prayer is increase the space. So there's more space in between the thoughts. And eventually, what will happen when we do that, is if we practice for a number of years, is that we will have periods of time when there are no thoughts. Now, why is this significant? Why is this powerful? A lot of people think, meditation or centering prayer, it's just about the life of the mind, but actually, it's about the entire body mind. And I don't use the word body and the mind separately if I can avoid it. I use the term body mind because it's all one continuum. And when our minds reach a state of profound quiet, what happens is it gives permission to the body to start to release tension that it's been storing in muscles, and and dysfunction that it has in the nervous system. So it's an entire, mind body kind of regeneration that starts to happen, where we let go of a lot of the tension that we have been storing in our body. And so it's a powerful practice, but ultimately the real dysfunction of the human mind, and the reason I think that centering prayer and meditation is so compelling, is because what if you had a car that you could never turn off? I mean that would just be unfortunate, to say the least. You would have to just leave it running in the garage all night, and there's no key to turn it on or off. It's just on all the time, right? That's the problem. Is that's the problem with the human mind. There's no off button. There's no pause button. It's just always going and going and going. And for most people, it's a monkey mind. It's jumping from this, jumping from that. And that's why people have said, who are familiar with centering prayer, they said if we had as much control over our legs as we do over our minds, we wouldn't be able to walk, because our minds, most human minds, are just, they're so highly distracted, and they've got these tapes playing from years ago that just keep going around and round and round, from some obsession about losing weight, or a fixation about something at work that just is constantly in your mind, but it's just going on and on and on, like a part-time job. I mean, so it distracts you from everything else. It distracts you from your spouse. It distracts you from your significant other. It distracts you from your kids, because it's just you can't turn it off. That's the problem, and that's why I think centering prayer and meditation are so compelling, and that's why I believe in it, because when our mind is quiet, we are capable of creative thinking, and synergistic thinking, and next level thinking, which is what we need in the 21st century to overcome some of the problems we have going on. We need some next level synergistic thinking, not just either or, but something more profound than that, something that transcends the opposites, and finds the still point.
Appreciate it. No, helpful. Maybe shifting gears just a little bit. And I know you, as an author, you've obviously or have read a ton of books. So can you mention one, two, three books? You probably can mention 10 books, but that have shaped your journey or that have really influenced you.
Well, I might mention just two books, because I know there's lots of books out there, and people, especially in this time, with with the fast pace of everything, have a hard time reading books. Most of the books that I read now, I think, Rich, I think you're the same way, is as I just do books on tape in the car,
Right, same,
and then
same.
on long trips, I get through maybe half a book. But one of my favorite books is The Sacrament of the Present Moment by Jean-Pierre de Caussade. Now, he was 16th century, but his insights are amazing, and he really talks like, well, you just have to take a look at the book, but he just talks about how, in this present moment, um, that there is this deeper level that we have access to, where our most creative energies, and I might say, divinity, with a lowercase d, it does nudge us if we are open to it, if we are available to listen, and that it can make all the difference in our life. So that's a great book. um, another book, it's actually right here. Let me yeah, here it is. This is Hidden Wholeness, and it's by, let's see, yeah, you can see it there, I think.
Yes.
um, but it's by Parker Palmer.
Okay.
And what I really like about that book is that he shows that, well, he struggles with clinical depression, and he in no way tries to hide it or minimize it or suppress it or deny it, which is so often what people do with whatever ugly chapters of their life they have, or some kind of ailment that they don't want people to know about, or whatever it might be. But what he shows in this book is that his clinical depression is actually an integral part of him finding a new kind of balance, a new kind of wholeness, which accepts every aspect of his life. Um, you know, One of the ways that we see Jesus operating in the Gospels is he accepts the people on the margins of society. He accepts the prostitutes, the lepers, the people who are into tax fraud. He um, he accepts all these different types of people, and the same is true, I think, in the deepest kind of meditation and centering prayers. We start to realize that we don't have to hide or suppress or deny any aspect of ourselves, that every aspect of ourselves, including in Parker Palmer's case, his clinical depression, that it all has a role to play in our integration and in us finding a new level of depth and comfort in our own skins. And so that's why I would recommend that book.
Neat, neat. No, and I haven't read either one of them. Obviously, I've heard of both of them, haven't read it, and I heard that about Parker Palmer as well. So maybe I'll add those two books to my either reading or listening, or often I do both. Sometimes I listen to a book and then I read it. So, but I'll add that to my, I guess, my long list of books that I want to read that I don't have time to read. So, who are maybe one or two mentors that have shaped who you are today, and how did they help you? And I'm losing the term mentor loosely. It doesn't it could even be someone you've read, you've listened to, you haven't necessarily met, or it could be someone you have met and spent some time with.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually looking I have pictures in front of me here at my desk of my uh, my primary mentors, and here's one. This is Thomas. I don't know why it gets messed up in the
There he is.
oh, there it is. Okay, that's
Now
better.
there it is. There it is.
Okay. So anyway, there's me with Thomas Keating. And yeah, Keating was a profound mentor for me, because I think for my early life, I kept on searching for somebody who embodied this presence or peace, you might say. Because for me, it's not enough to just talk about it or write about it or whatever. I have to experience somebody who, you just get this overwhelming feeling. This is a person who has come into their own, somebody who has you, you know uh, done a deep dive, into their own soul, and who has come up radiant and just smiling and with a profound peace. And that's how I experienced Keating, and that was really important for me, to find somebody in the Christian tradition. He's a Benedictine monk, but well, actually he's Trappist, but Trappist is a segment of Benedictine. But anyway, that was important to me, to find somebody who represented the tradition, I think, in the deepest sense, and in someone who was realized, you might say. And then this is my other primary mentor. I like this picture. It's when she was younger. I don't know. Can you?
I can see it. I can see it.
Okay, you can see it. All right. Yeah, this is, well, it's not the best, but that's my mother. And I mean, a lot of, of course, a lot of people, will have one parent that they really resonate with, and who is similar in so many ways. But my mother, it was kind of, I would say, next level. She was English. Her mother was 100% English, and and she always insisted on tea time. And so tea time would last usually about 45 minutes, um, and we would sit down, and she taught me what I think conversation on a deeper level is, not just about, the sports team or the weather or whatever, but she would ask me questions like she said, Amos, what is really inspiring you right now? You know, who's your best friend and why? Um, you know, what are you really passionate about? Those kind of things. And she would ask me those in-depth kinds of questions, which made me, I think, start to think on a deeper level, and to think about those bigger questions. And we used to go fishing, the whole family, and my mom and I would be in one canoe, and my sister and dad would be in the other canoe. And those are some of my best memories. I just remember casting towards the shoreline, and we would get into these deep kind of conversations about life and God, and nature, and what's it really all for, and so on. And so that's why she, throughout my life, just was, I would say, one of my primary mentors. And she, and she was an Episcopalian by practice, and she did have a history with Quakers also before she became Episcopalian, and she was very involved in the church. Um, but she was a guiding light for me, and she also loved Thomas Keating, and she recorded all of his talks on tapes and sent me the tapes for my birthday one time. She
Wow.
was just very intentional about this kind of thing. She knew what was important to me, and the spiritual path was very important to her also. And so yeah, we resonated on that level.
Nice, very nice. As we begin to wrap it up, and it dawned on me, I think what we'll do this again, because obviously you have a book, Holistic Mysticism, that came out last year, November or so, if I remember correctly, and I read it and I really enjoyed it. And we could spend probably a whole episode on that book rather than try to talk about two books. And that's you're a Quaker, and you. So why don't I have you back on in the near future when it's good for you, and we'll talk about that book, and we'll talk about Quakers, and what who are they, and what do they believe, and I enjoy the Quakers. I went to the traditional silent service a couple of years back and found it really powerful, and I was amazed at the about 100 people packed into this house, including children, sitting in silence for that duration. So I'll have you back on, and then we'll talk about your book, and we'll talk about the Quakers, if that's okay with you.
That sounds good. That sounds good.
So how do you, as we wrap it up here, how do you stay grounded and focused on your work? Do you have any practices that you find helpful? And they can be more than just centering prayer as well.
Well, I think, so I have this continuation of what my mom taught me with tea time. Is my wife and I, we will sit down and we'll have tea. And there's something about the ritual of tea, that you have this period of time, about 45 minutes uninterrupted. And there's something about, digesting the same, in our case, Harney and Sons Earl Grey tea. um, there's something about that, when you're intentional about it, where the conversation, goes deeper, and there's a shared intimacy, and so it's a kind of a meditation, really. And I would really recommend it for people. I know you, Rich, with your wife Trina, you guys have pressed coffee
Right.
grounds, and enjoy that together. But I do think it's important in these times when everything's usually pretty frantic, to just set aside some time to just really connect, just with one person, and to have all of their focus and intention on that person, and to have some kind of ritual that marks the beginning and the close of that time. And then every morning before breakfast, and then every evening before dinner, I do a centering prayer sit. And sometimes, because I've been doing it for so long, I can get to a place of quiet, within a few minutes. And so I don't necessarily sit the entire 20 minutes that's recommended, twice a day. But for many years, like 15 years, it was just my practice, 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening. And I would always try to get a third sit in the right before lunch. And I would tell my admin, I would say, hey, tell people I'm in a meeting, and the truth is, I am in a meeting, right? I'm in a
That's true.
meeting with my higher power, and I'm uh, in the midst of a centering prayer meeting. So I would, yeah, encourage people. I know Rich has been a long time centering prayer practitioner also, but the real beauty and power of this is the experience. I like that quotation that says, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and if that's true, then an experience is worth 1,000 pictures, and so that experience in prayer, there's no substitute for it. No reading that can be done. There's no lectures that can go to, retreats, whatever. It doesn't matter. You've got to just have that time every day, and I would say at least one retreat every year, even if it's just 2 or 3 days, but to really deepen the practice so that you can experience what the Christian mystics and monks and desert fathers and mothers have been trying to teach us about.
Great. So can you share any maybe upcoming projects or books you're working on, or things that are on your mind that you want to do in your space, whether it's Quakers, writing, retreats, teaching, some type of contemplative art activity?
Yeah. Well, I wrote an article for Friends Journal magazine,
Oh, nice,
which
nice.
they're going to be publishing soon. And it's basically about how a lot of people, when they talk about the founding of the Quakers, they talk about George Fox only. But I talk about how really Margaret Fell Fox, his wife, he wouldn't have done nearly as well in his ministry and wouldn't have gotten anywhere near as far without her. She was an amazing person, and they were really a kind of, I would say, a dynamic duo. And that's kind of unique in the world's religions, to have a couple that's how I see them is really at the foundation, or the core, or the source of Quakerism. Usually, most religious traditions tend to be, patriarchal, but that's one unique thing about the Quakers that I really love, is that we're really strong male and female leaders, from the beginning. So I wrote that article for Friends Journal, and now I'm writing an article. I'm hoping that maybe Spirituality and Health magazine will pick it up, but it's just about deep rest. That rest that goes beyond the standard that we think about of rest. People will jog daily, or they'll get into therapy, or they'll listen to relaxing music. They'll do all these different things, but none of it really gets as deep as what Rich talks about in his work, and what I talk about, which is, it's almost like you have this glacier, and underneath the surface of the muscles is where the hidden tension is, and that's what really needs to be worked with to experience a much more peaceful, maybe effortless kind of moments in life.
No, that certainly makes sense. So as we ended here, is there any one, maybe a tough question, but one thing you might want to leave people with? I know we covered a lot of ground, but any one thing that you want to just share with people that might be a good takeaway for people that stayed on and listened to our whole interview?
Um, well, I just think, this centering prayer that Rich has talked about in his work and in his book that he recently put out there, um, and the books that I've written, the motivation for all of it has been centering prayer. And centering prayer is, I mean, people are tempted, I think, when they feel a lot of anxiety and they're going through some really heavy duty stuff, like, maybe divorce, or some kind of domestic violence, or some kind of diagnosis of a chronic illness, or whatever it is, or maybe a child who is suicidal. It could be so many different things, but the temptation is to to reach for alcohol, or to reach for a substance, or to do some other kind of irresponsible form of self-soothing. But really, the deepest kind of self-soothing that goes beyond all those others, in my estimation, I know that I'm biased, but it's also based on experience, and I think Rich would probably say the same. It is centering prayer. So I would encourage the listeners, if you haven't already, it's not that difficult. Just a few minutes every day. Practice as much as you can. If you feel like after 5 minutes you've had enough, then stop at 5 minutes. But just make sure you do a little bit every day for about a month. And once you do that, you'll have a little bit of a foundation, and you can start to increase the time, and it won't feel so excruciating. Like, what? I have to sit here in silence for 20 minutes? You kidding me? So just be easy on yourself, just a few minutes a day, but the payoff is huge. And so I encourage you, and I'm sure Rich encourages you to, if you haven't already, give centering prayer a try.
No, great closing thoughts. No, so thanks a lot for your time, Amos Smith. I know the 10th anniversary edition of Healing the Divide, certainly will help my community. I'm excited to share it with them, and I'm excited to share, our conversation and your book with them. So thanks so much for taking 45, 50 minutes of your time today.
Of course. And thank you, Rich. Thanks for your work.